Well, hello there. Catherine Langman here, back with another episode of the Productpreneur Success Podcast and my final episode for the year. Now, every year so far with my podcast, my final episode of the year has been a book review about some of the best books that I've read over the year and really what the standouts were for me that I would recommend for you. And of course, I don't think that it's any secret at this point that I love to read. This year has been no exception. I worked out in preparing myself for this episode, I've managed to read 2 nonfiction books per month, either, autobiographies or books relating to mindset or business. And I've also read the same number of fiction books as well. And that's not counting the ones that my now 12-year-old daughter Isabel has been reading to me at night. And I think I've probably shared before, for me, I don't actually watch really any TV at all, aside from streaming the odd movie on weekends. Honestly, I haven't actually even done much of that this year, although I have done it a little bit more frequently ever since my eldest son got his P's in September. And, I'm able to sleep a little bit more because, of course, before that, I was trying to maintain all of the energy and the sleep required to keep driving my boys to their 10 squad sessions a week, including 6 morning sessions. I was exhausted for a lot of that time and pretty much comatose by 9 p.m. at night. But honestly, I also find watching TV or really looking at any kind of screen at night just kind of razzes up my brain, and then I just can't settle down to sleep. So I stopped really consuming any screen-related content after dinner a few years ago, and I just read instead. And I will say that the business and mindset-related books I typically listen to on Audible, and I'm not listening to them at night because, again, it just razzes up my brain a little bit too much, and I start having lots of ideas, and then I can't settle down to sleep. So I'm either listening to them whilst I'm, in the past I was driving my sons to their swimming training sessions. Or now that I don't have to do that anymore, I'm listening to them while exercising or I'm doing my chores. And I try not to do too many of those. Anyway, novels I read in paperback form at night, and that is my, wind down thing, distraction thing. Anyhow, this year, I think you'll discover that my non-fiction reading has been, very much along some specific themes, and I suspect it'll be quite helpful for a lot of you as well. Because, of course, this year has been a challenge for every single business owner that I know, that I've spoken to, or that I've observed online, like in Facebook groups. I've been seeing a lot of people trying to sell their businesses this year. Sadly, many of them were or are, fire sale type situations, or businesses that aren't really saleable because they're, the business owner has kind of waited until they're completely burned out, overwhelmed, and the business revenue and profit have deteriorated, or they've just, they basically got a job. They haven't really systemized the business and made it into an asset that's really desirable to buy. I've also seen a lot of businesses close down, right? And it's been a really tough year. In my own business, we've been impacted too. And sure, we don't manufacture many products, only my planner books. And so we haven't been as directly affected by supply chain and logistics cost increases like most, if not all of you, but we have been indirectly affected by those, as well as the horrendous floods early this year. Because between all of those skyrocketing costs and delays, and businesses experiencing catastrophic losses in the floods, and people selling their businesses and closing down because of those increases in costs, and things aren't viable anymore. We had a couple of months earlier in the year where several clients shut up shop or had to just really pull back all of their marketing spend and either permanently or temporarily stop working with us. It's really awful that, we had quite a few clients impacted by floods and other, natural disasters, as well as, all of the supply chain stuff that's been going on. And of course, my own and my team's experiences of those events are hardly comparable to the stresses of actually experiencing them firsthand. So I'm not suggesting that at all. But what happened for us was a sudden big drop in revenue without a matching drop in overheads, because in my business, our team's wages are our biggest overhead. And we went from running at about 75% wages to sales to about 105% wages to sales, which, as it sounds, means we were suddenly running at a loss. And I know it's not uncommon for businesses to sometimes be in the red. I've been there many times over, 15 odd years. But when you consider that our team's wages are essentially our cost of goods, if you compare the way a service business model compares to a product business, then I reckon all of you would agree that selling your products for less than it costs to make them is not very smart. So obviously, that situation was not sustainable, and it was also very stressful at the time. But I was really, really, really motivated to do what I could to keep my team intact. Any of you who have worked with any of the members from my team, I think would agree, they are a pretty special bunch of women. And I really wanted to make sure that we could stay together as a team. And now, at the end of 2022, I can say that our business is in a vastly different and better place, which is amazing. Our top line revenue for the calendar year, it is down compared to the previous calendar year, but our profit is up 95%. So I think our top line revenue was down about 30%, but bottom line profit up about 95%. And that is a result that I'm so thrilled about and super proud that our team came together and we achieved this together. So the books that I read throughout the year were hugely influential to my plans and my decisions, and, really the way that I operated as a leader as well in my business really did lead us through that downturn and out the other side and back to profitable growth. And I also, so it's not all down to books, I did continue to work with my own mentor, which, let me tell you, was a hard decision to keep making during those few tough months. And I'm sure many of you have been faced with decisions like that as well. But to be honest, the strategic advice that my mentor gave me was absolutely critical to the end result as well. One of the themes that I've observed is common between all the most successful businesses that I've either been involved with over the year myself, or that I have been involved with, through networking groups, and with my mentor as well, with his other clients, is just how necessary it's been to pivot and adapt to constant change. I know in my own business, I started the year with a business plan and goals that I had set at the end of 2021, which was when things in e-commerce and the online marketing world generally were booming with COVID, right? But by March this year, it became really clear that continuing to proceed with rolling out that plan would totally kill my business. And I had to roll things back and take things in a different direction. One of the books that I've read this year that I really loved is called Never Finished, and it's by retired Navy SEAL David Goggins. This is the second book by David Goggins. The first is You Can't Hurt Me, and they're both excellent, particularly on Audible, as there's some really great conversations between the narrator and also the author in between the chapters. Now, if you don't know who David Goggins is, he is an ultra athlete. So all of his stories and endeavours, or he's an ultra athlete now, but in the past, obviously, he was in the armed services. He was a Navy SEAL. So a lot of the stories that he talks about in this particular book revolve around these incredible feats of athleticism that he pulls off. I mean, he's quite incredible. And how he's pushed his body through the limits that most of us think are physically or humanly possible. But what I particularly like about this second book is that it's more about the mindset breakthroughs and strategies that he's developed that have really enabled him to push past the limits that, most of us feel like it's impossible. We've reached our limit. We can't go further, which is very normal, right? And so throughout this book, I was able to relate almost all of his mindset strategies to business and to personal life as well. But, given I'm not an athlete and not particularly interested in becoming one, it wasn't going to be relevant to me in that regard. But in one particular story, he's describing a really grueling event. It was his first 240-mile run, which I don't even know how long that is, because obviously I'm in Australia and we don't use miles. It's a long way, right? And the other thing about this event actually was that it was held at altitude, and I think from memory it was in some sort of mountainous area in Utah. I don't recall exactly. But competitors in that race, they had 110 hours or something like that to complete the event. So it's not like this 240 miles have to be raced start to finish with no rest time. In the first book that he wrote, he talked about becoming a ultra marathon runner and running some 100-mile races. And in those ones that he'd done in the past, they were all well signposted, and there were a lot of checkpoints quite closely spaced apart, if I phrase it like that. But this 240-mile event is different, and it required competitors to navigate themselves without the route being signposted, and the checkpoints and aid stations were really many hours apart. And at one point in the race, probably in the dead of night, it's always going to be in the dead of night when it's even harder to see where you're going, his crewmate, who was his pacer and navigator, got them lost, and they ended up something like, 15 miles off track in the wrong direction, necessitating, turning back and retracing their footsteps to get back on the right track. And one analogy here that relates to business is that sometimes there are events that happen to you or to your business that you can't necessarily control. And sometimes the most productive thing that you can do is to go backwards for a bit before you figure out, what's the right pathway forward, or at least the best next step forwards, right? And David Goggins could have been seriously pissed off with this crewmate for adding an extra however many miles on top of the 240 miles he already had to race. But would it help him if he spent energy on that, being pissed off and angry? No. And Goggins he's had lots of times like this, as you can imagine, especially in the armed forces, where things don't go to plan, where the adrenaline has been pumping for so long that you're on the verge of burnout, where things are incredibly, ridiculously stressful. And if you're having to retrace your steps, that can also make you feel like you're a bit of a loser, right? Like, what are you doing here? So we need to develop mindsets and thinking processes and, I guess, habits to help quickly reduce the adrenaline, to reduce the stress hormone cortisol, and to increase your levels of belief. All of this is necessary, right? And Goggins refers to these as mind zones, much like athletes think about heart rate zones for exercise. And even me, who is not a runner, I know about heart rate zones for training. So that made sense. And when you're relaxed, you'd be in a mind zone, say 1 or 2. And when you're stressed out to the max, you'd be in like a mind zone 5. And so he's developed these simple daily practices that really help you to quickly downshift from a mind zone 5 to, say, a mind zone 1 or 2, so that your stress hormones drop and your belief goes up. And when you experience those zone 5s, it's so easy for things to happen in just a few moments or even a split second to influence you into making decisions to quit pursuing your dreams. And, I guess if you think about it, most of us, when we're dreaming up our vision or we're setting our goals or we're creating our plans, we're doing that when we're feeling relaxed and motivated, and we have the energy for it, and we have clarity around what we need to do and want to do to achieve it all. But then when we start, things always get hard, really hard sometimes. But we look around and often all we see is that our competitors are all sunshine and roses. They appear to be thriving and to make it look all really easy, which of course is what they show, Instagram being the highlight reel that it generally is. And in those moments when things are really hard for us and appear to be really easy for others, we can feel like we're just not cut out for it. And in those moments, to experience severe imposter syndrome. And, we can give up on our dreams in those split moments when it just feels all too hard. But the reality is, as Goggins talks about, everyone goes through the hard times. The messy middle, and there's memes about this for business, right? The messy middle is a rite of passage we all have to go through from the start line to achieving our goal. So we need to have, these mindset strategies to pull ourselves back from those unhelpful mind zone 5s and to find our pathway back to mind zone 1 or 2, so that we can be a bit more constructive in how we move forwards. Now, another mindset-related book that I read earlier this year was Gladiator Mindset by UK Olympic gold medalist swimmer Adam Peaty. I promise you, not everything I read this year is athlete or sports related. I think it was just these 2. Anyway, probably you can guess, my sons recommended I get this one. They probably actually asked me to get it. They probably wanted me to pay for it for them, but couched it as a recommendation. I don't remember now. Anyway, they do know I'm a little bit of a soft touch when it comes to spending money on books. So anyway, this guy, a little bit like Goggins, he came from a pretty tough childhood. He didn't grow up with much of any kind of privilege or much in the way of opportunities, but clearly he was a really good swimmer. But swimming is not the type of sport that you can just, you can excel at just purely based off talent. I actually don't know if there's anything that you can do in life that you can be really good at just based off talent without any hard work. But anyway, there's loads of talented swimmers, but like many endeavors in life, it's also a sport that hard work pays off, probably more than talent. And in fact, there's one of the guys on the Australian Olympic team, I think it's Brendan Smith, has spoken about in the past how he wasn't the most talented on the team or even within his own family where all his siblings were swimmers, but he basically outworked everyone else, and his commitment and his consistency of effort is what paid off. But back to Adam Peaty though, a lot of his book also talks about, the sort of mindset breakthroughs that he had to figure out on his way to high achievement. And I remember in one chapter, he talks about when you're on the blocks waiting for the start gun to sound off and to dive into the race, he would almost see a red mist. And this is his kind of competitive spirit, I guess, manifesting it into, what he visually sees, and it's his way of channeling his nerves into a productive, positive force. When you're on the blocks, it's so easy to let the nerves get the better of you and to worry about what the guys in the other lanes are doing, or to think that they'll beat you, or to worry that they'll beat you, or to let the roar of the crowd distract you, or just to feel self-conscious and like you don't belong in the race. How many people feel like that in business too, right? And you do have to have some level of nerves before a race, because without a little bit of a spike in adrenaline, you're probably just going to go out for a leisurely Sunday stroll. But you don't want so much that you're going to drop a bundle, right? And again, it's a bit like Goggins with his mindset zones. So the red mist is this way of really channeling those nerves and staving off any kind of feelings of self-doubt, and just having the most belief possible that not only can you do it, but you want it more than anyone else, and you are going to go for it. And you need to, you do need to have done the consistent effort and work in the lead up to the race. For swimmers, they have to have put the hours in the pool. But without channeling those nerves into that positive energy force, you're really going to struggle to capitalize on those efforts to achieve a great result. And at the time that I was reading this, not only had we had those losses, as I described earlier, but there was also this really aggressive competitor of ours. Of course, it was, some young blokes, but anyway, they were basically stalking a couple of our clients. And I really mean stalking, like literally calling them and emailing them nonstop and making the most ridiculous promises, the kind, it's like, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And it was stalkerish. It was an awful experience for these women, clients of ours. Thankfully, we didn't lose any of those clients to those monkeys, and probably the best outcome was that instead of me letting doubt creep in and worry about losing these clients, I basically channeled the red mist into this competitive, positive energy force. I didn't want to lose to someone using underhanded, creepy sales tactics. And like I said, I'm happy to say those clients have stayed with me and with my team, and they've enjoyed incredible growth results for the rest of the year, which is fantastic. Strategy-wise, I knew that I needed to do things differently this year compared to last year, as I think have all of you. I think probably all businesses have had to. The way that we were working honestly just didn't suit this new climate. Like I said before, as a service business, our cost of goods, if you like, is our team. So our wages are always our highest overhead. But I've never been in a situation where wages cost more than revenue. And I realised that the obvious answer here is to put your prices up, but I didn't want to do that either. Not when our clients were also experiencing all the cost constraints and with their supply chain and logistics as well. So the next book that I read was called From Red to Black by Robert Curry. This one is not new. I'm not sure when it was published, several years ago, many years ago, I'd say. But it actually is written in a really engaging way. It's almost like a fictional novel rather than, a non-fiction business strategy book. So the setting is in a factory. From memory, I think they make, sell and install shutters, window shutters or something like that. But the business had become so unprofitable, in the red, as the title infers, that it was on the verge of bankruptcy. So the story follows the main character, being the CEO, who is really worn down, really burnt out from the stress and the effort of running his business, and doesn't know what to do to turn this around, right? And so this CEO hires a consultant to advise him on how to turn the business around. And part of the turnaround was identifying a couple of team members who were actually stealing from the company. But mostly the process involves redesigning all of the processes of how they do things, how to make the products, how to sell the products, how to install the products, and to do all of that in, a productive, efficient way that was profitable, right? And, also getting the right team members on board and really instituting solid leadership and management processes as well. Now, and on, if you can make a book interesting that is teaching about how to, document your systems and processes, I think you're doing really, really well. It was a very, very entertaining listen on Audible. So if you know that you need to improve your productivity and profitability, but you don't know how to go about it, or you find that whole concept of documenting your systems and processes incredibly boring, which I'd say probably most of us do, then I definitely would recommend this book, as it does, like I say, make it the dry topic, much more entertaining. And as a result of kind of listening through that story in my own business, I basically pulled apart and redesigned every aspect of what we do and how we do it, so that we can be profitable and also provide an incredible service. And I will say, I believe that we provide an even better service and level of, strategic input to our clients' businesses than we ever have in the past. So it was definitely a good result there. The next strategy-related book that I read was That Will Never Work, written by Mark Randolph, who was the co-founder and first CEO of Netflix. Now, presumably you all know who Netflix is as a business. I'm not sure if you are familiar, though, with their origin story, but in the early days, Netflix was a DVD store, an online DVD store. So they sold DVDs as well as renting them out, but they weren't originally a content creation or streaming service like they are today. They were essentially an early e-commerce business. Back in the day, of course, when there weren't any kind of off-the-shelf e-commerce platforms like we can use Shopify today. Everything had to be hard-coded. Anyway, again, this book is written in such an entertaining way. It's not a story, it's a memoir. But, I think you would expect the founder of a storytelling entertainment company like Netflix to write an entertaining book, which he has. But what I love about this is that it shares the details of their early startup days, when they had to work out how to price, package, ship their products profitably, and all of their processes for how to do that, to do all that, designing packaging that would ship DVDs at a cost-effective price, as well as keep the discs safe, their customer acquisition costs, and, how many repeat sales they needed before they would be profitable. And the answer is many. Like, they weren't just profitable off one sale. And there were so many more things in there, it was like their workflow for how they would pick and pack. It was how, people back then, they didn't know how to sell on an e-commerce website. There was this whole process of designing the user experience and how to also educate people on this new concept of being able to rent, and then how do you send it back, and all of this kind of stuff, right? And then there was this process of continuous improvement and innovation before they worked out if they actually had a viable business model. And now you all know how much I love data and metrics, but what this book describes so entertainingly as well as thoroughly is that getting those metrics to the point of being a profitable, viable business isn't something that happens immediately when you launch. It's a process of iteration over time, of constantly coming up with new and innovative ideas to test out that might solve problems or that might improve the results. And honestly, if there's any more relevant book to read right now, when this process of iteration and pivoting is key, It's Now. So if you haven't read this book, this is a great one. At one point, Netflix actually almost ran out of money before they got to that point of viability. They had basically, I guess this is me reading between the lines, but had they in that moment just given up because, it all seemed hopeless or impossible, or had they not tested as many ideas as they did, or, any of that, imagine the world we would live in now without Netflix. And quite possibly if Netflix weren't here, we might not have any of the other movie streaming platforms that we have available to us. They completely changed the landscape, didn't they? And I guess the other thing that I found so uplifting about this story is that Netflix was a startup right before the dot-com boom. So at that time in the late 90s, online businesses, they were kind of going nuts. I don't know if you know, I actually worked in a dot-com startup back in 1999. But with Netflix, or just with, not with Netflix specifically, but with these dot-com boom businesses at the time, they were highly speculative as well. Like pretty much, investors would just throw money at pretty much any business that pitched themselves as a dot-com anything or a digital disruptor or anything like that. But 3 years later, as most of these businesses were actually kind of bullshit, the dot-com bust came around and caused a recession. And down went the business that I worked at. I think I was there for 6 months before they shut down. Anyway, but by that time, Netflix had actually worked out how to operate profitably. They were one of the very few that lasted through that dot-com bust period. And they, had established themselves as a viable, profitable business model. So they actually grew through that recession. And of course, now they are one of the most successful companies in the world. So given the tough economic times that we're in right now, technically not a recession, and I hope that doesn't happen, but even if it does, take heart that you can still grow a profitable business. So definitely a great book to listen to or read. 2 more books that I read this year that were brilliant from a business strategy perspective, as well as being narrated really well for Audible, if you're a fan like me, and they're by the same authors. So the books are Who Not How, and the second one is The Gap and the Gain, and they're both written by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And they are actually about some fairly simple concepts, but they share the psychology around why these concepts are so impactful and effective for highly ambitious people, high achievers. And it is business related. I guess you could probably relate to what they're describing in other endeavours as well. And certainly some of the stories describing and illustrating these examples in the books are not all business related either, but they are very compelling stories and examples that emphasize their points and just really impart the strategy. So Who Not How is based on the fact that one single person cannot scale a business alone. Sure, of course, we could all just create and I don't mean to use the word just, we can create a job for ourselves. That's completely fine. If that's what you want to do. But building a business is different, and trying to do everything alone is going to put a hard limit on your potential. But further to that is the reality that none of us actually has all of the skills or knowledge that will be required to achieve new or bigger goals, right? The idea that we can set ourselves a goal to, say, grow our business by 50% over a year, but then continue to only do the things that we currently know how to do or have the capacity or capability to do, it's a bit ludicrous, right? The old adage, continuing to do the same thing, expecting a different result, is the definition of insanity. It might be cliche, but it's also true. And then consider, how long does it actually take to learn whatever new skill is required to hit these goals? Sometimes there is a cost benefit to learning how to DIY, but often that's not actually the case. And if you think about the lost potential revenue that you'd have if you stuck to what you were good at and paid someone else to do what you're not good at, but is necessary to be done, or would just take you too long to learn and it's going to take you away from other essential things, then often you're not, often you are ahead if you pay. Not always, but often, right? So one example I'm going to share here is relating to graphic design. And I see so many small business owners who spend hours and hours creating all the graphics content for their social media. Shout out to my beautiful client, Michelle. You'll know who you are if you listen to this, but I'm not going to ID you. and this is a while ago, used to spend half her working week creating social media content because it's, it took a while because it's just not her area of expertise. And she, at the time, she had the mindset that she just couldn't afford to pay anyone else to do that, right? But that mindset was keeping her stuck small. And when she realized it would literally only be not very much money at all to pay someone else to do that work, who was good at doing that work, and free up that, it was such a significant amount of time to work on the things that she was actually better at. And then she was able to grow or generate bigger, faster growth. And so that was a really, really important lesson for her. And obviously had a good result. So then in the second book by these authors, The Gap and the Gain, the authors they're actually sharing some really tangible habits that help highly ambitious people to keep a positive mindset as they set about trying to achieve their big goals. And this is different stuff to the books like Goggins's one. So because it's written, one of the authors is an organizational psychologist. But really, this book is good for anyone who worries about the future, or has a fear of failure, or who has that monkey mind that comes awake at night thinking about all the things that you haven't done yet, or who ruminates about, negative things or mistakes that might have happened in the past, or who just worries about all of the what ifs. Clearly, I'm telling you my trigger list here. It's really common for high achievers in particular, or just your type A personalities, I guess, as well, to have all of those thoughts. And it can keep you miserable and it can keep you stressed out. Whereas actually learning some really simple tactics and strategies that you can employ each day, focusing on measuring your progress first and training your brain to focus on the positives, basically it's kind of giving your brain as much evidence as you can on a daily basis that you're a successful person. And so then you actually gain a lot more momentum towards your goals, as well as feel happier and more confident and less stressed and less overwhelmed. Hallelujah. Who doesn't want any of that? And also, not like their first book that I mentioned where, they are advocating that you pay other people to work with you. In this one, it's all free stuff. There's nothing that you have to spend money on. So it's a good book for that reason too. The other thing about both these books is that they are also narrated really well on Audible. I mean, frankly, is there nothing worse than a boring narrator who can't read well out loud? I don't know. But these books are well read, and both in the narrating the book content and then also incorporating conversations between the authors in between chapters. So there's so much extra value and gold just from listening to those conversations that is printed in the book contents. So there are lots of other books that I have read or reread this year. So from a mindset perspective, I reread Get Rich, Lucky Bitch. So this is a bit of a tangent here, but I was motivated to reread that one, or listen, to be correct, at the recommendation of a really good friend back early in the year when we took that big financial hit. And I'd recommend this book to any woman in business, particularly if you feel like you struggle a bit to price your products properly, or feel bad asking for customers to pay a good price or to pay full price. I definitely saw many women-led brands over the last year struggle to put their prices up to cover their own increased costs, with manufacturing and shipping costs going up so much significantly, and, exchange rates also taking a nosedive. And I think it's a common female trait. I could be wrong, but I feel like it's a common trait for us to always put ourselves last and to go out of our way to keep absolutely everyone else happy, to bend over backwards, in fact. But, this sort of an approach ultimately has led to many businesses just, closing down because they're not profitable, and the business owner completely and utterly exhausted, which is, honestly, I do feel like it's a bit of a mindset. And when you compare that to larger Aussie brands that, or just larger brands generally, they don't kind of put themselves last in the same way. This is not a price-related scenario, but just the other day, because I am a last-minute Christmas shopper, I was purchasing some Christmas gifts from it's an Aussie brand. It's not what you would call like a major retailer. I try not to buy from Amazon if I can avoid it. But I purchased from this brand And I stuffed up one of the orders and selected regular post instead of express post. Silly me, I know if I'm going to leave it to the last minute, I need to choose express. Anyway, I realized as soon as the transaction went through what I had done, and I got in touch with their live chat customer service immediately, and they refused to change the postage, even though I was willing to pay extra. I would have paid full price for the express on top of the regular post that I already paid, but no, they wouldn't bend. Anyway, from a well-being perspective, I read the Wim Hof Method by Wim Hof himself, aka the Iceman. If you're not familiar with this guy, Google him. He's a massive advocate for cold showers or just cold water soaking, I suppose, I don't know, coupled with meditative breathing techniques. And it's a method for kind of managing stress and also increasing health and well-being. And for a while there, I actually was really diligent having these cold showers every day. And then at the start, I think I stopped doing it at the start of winter when I got COVID, and I'd actually completely forgotten about it until I was just going through my book list for the year for this episode, and I was reminded about it. And I remember I actually felt really good at the time. I was, it was helping with my tension headaches, my sleep was better, my energy was better. So in remembering that, I think I'm going to get back into it. It's hot in summer now, so I think there's no excuse. Other books I reread over the year were Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller and The Code of the Extraordinary Mind by Vishen Lakhiani, both incredible reads that I've recommended in my Book Roundup podcasts in the past. So those were the highlights, my top business and mindset books for 2022. And it's not the whole list of books that I've read or listened to, but it's the ones that I recommend. So I really hope that you've enjoyed it. I really hope that you might have found one or two books that you might be motivated to read yourself. If you do, I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to hear what you've taken away from it or what you might apply in your own life or your business. And I'd love to invite you to jump into our Rockstar Productpreneur Facebook group and share that with me. Now, if you are keen to work with someone who is skilled at growing businesses and turning businesses and brands around and achieving those really big leaps of growth, then I will be opening up a few spots to work with me in the new year. If you are curious and would like to just explore what that might look like, or to see if you're a good fit to work together with me, please make sure you book in your strategy session before our calendar fills up. So just head to productpreneuracademy.com/strategy to schedule that in. Now, next week on the show, it will be week 1, episode 1 of 2023, if you can believe it. And to kick off the year, I will be walking you through an updated vivid vision planning process. And so I really hope that you will tune in for that one. For now, though, I hope you enjoy the last few days of 2022, and bye for now.